Chapter 13, Isolation and the Squash Patch. On the first crisp Wednesday of autumn, the girls got off the bus and saw that Auntie had parked the wheelbarrow next to the porch so they could get right to work after snack. "They are calling for frost tonight," she said. "We have to get the winter squash in." The girls looked at each other and laughed. They were just talking about the squash harvest on their bus ride, wondering when it would be time. Colleen's obsession with flowers had expanded into a new appreciation for vegetables, especially once she learned that flowering vegetables like squash provide support for pollinators. She loved to watch the bees disappear inside the orange squash blossoms, only to pop out again covered in yellow pollen. When the blossoms fell off, Zoe showed her the pollinated ovary that would eventually ripen into a fruit. The large squash patch was divided into thirds. Auntie had harvested most of the young zucchinis throughout the summer, but left several of them on the vine to ripen their seeds. The leftover zucchinis had grown huge and inedible, with hard yellow skin, but were packed with mature, ripe seeds. Next to the zucchinis grew the smooth, tender-skinned butternut squash. Over the summer, they ripened from green bottle shapes to the familiar pale orange butternuts the girls saw in the grocery store. Since butternuts are sensitive to frost, they gathered those first. The last section of the squash patch was filled with creamy orange pumpkin-shaped squashes. They cut the thick stems and loaded the heavy fruits into the wheelbarrow. Colleen noticed the funny belly buttons on the bottom of the fruits. "Auntie, what kind of weird pumpkins are these?" "These aren't pumpkins at all," said Auntie. "They are lower Salmon River winter squashes. They might look like pumpkins, but the fat bottoms and thick stems tell us they belong to a different family altogether." "What do you mean by a different family?" asked Zoe. Auntie was quiet for a moment and then sighed. "I hate to say this, girls, but to really understand about plant families, I'm going to have to talk about scientific names." Colleen perked right up at the sound of scientific names and said, "Do we need to write this down? Should I go get our plant journals, like right now?" Auntie laughed and nodded. Colleen took off at a run to retrieve their plant journals from the porch and was breathless with excitement when she returned. "Scientific names," she blurted. "Are those the unpronounceable names I see in my seed catalogs? I've been wondering what those were and what they're for." "That's what those are, and that hard-to-pronounce language is Latin. Long ago, scientists agreed to give a Latin name to every living thing on Earth so there would be no confusion when communicating about the natural world between people who might speak different languages. We humans have a Latin name, which is Homo sapiens." "That's Ms. Sapiens to you," said Zoe, and the two girls laughed at the funny name. "Good one, Zoe," said Auntie, "and you make a good point. As a seed saver, it's the last Latin name of the plant that makes a difference. Take this squash patch, for example. All three of these plants, zucchini, butternut, and lower Salmon River squash, share the same first name, cucurbita, which means squash. But they have different last names. Lower Salmon River has the last name of Maxima, so their full name is Cucurbita maxima. Zucchini belongs to the Cucurbita pepo family, and butternuts belong to Cucurbita machata. Since they all have different last names, they belong to 3 different families of squash, which means they can live near each other without cross-pollinating and ruining future seeds. The girls recorded the 3 names in their journals and wrote, "Knowing the scientific Latin names of plants helps seed savers avoid cross-pollination." "What if you want to grow different things from the same family, but still save seed?" asked Colleen. "Can you do that?" Auntie laughed. You can if you know the next rule of seed saving, which is called isolation distance. The girls wrote the words in their journals and waited for an explanation. To keep different members of the same family from cross-pollinating, you have to isolate them from each other. Usually, this is done by separating them with distance. Isolation distances are directly related to how far a plant's pollen can travel. If it's a selfie, for example, pollen doesn't travel very far, so the isolation distance is measured in feet. That's why selfies are so easy for beginning seed savers. What if something is pollinated by insects? Said Colleen, who knew a lot about bees. It seems like you'd have to put your related plants pretty far apart because a bee can fly up to a mile. Good job, Colleen. That's exactly right, said Auntie. The isolation distance for most insect-pollinated plants is 1 to 2 miles. And if it's wind-pollinated? Probably even farther, said Zoe, because wind travels farther than bees. That's right, said Auntie. So what happens if your neighbor is growing pumpkins when you are trying to grow zucchini seed? Said Colleen. Wow, you just recognized one of the biggest challenges of neighboring seed saving. If your neighbor's gardens are closer than a mile, then you'll need to see if you can agree to grow the same variety of pepo so you can both save seeds. Multiple gardens grown this way can help meet minimum population standards while also respecting isolation distances. What about my flowers, said Zoe. Do I have to worry about them cross-pollinating each other? I didn't know about isolation distances when I planted them. Can I still save their seeds? You can, said Auntie. If you look up the Latin names in Colleen's seed catalogs, you'll find they are all different, making it impossible for them to cross-pollinate. Let's do that tomorrow during recess, Zoe, said Colleen. Auntie finished filling the wheelbarrow while the girls wrote. Isolation distance. Space needed between family members when growing for seed. Distance depends on how the plant is pollinated. Colleen offered to push the heavy wheelbarrow up the hill to Auntie's porch. Zoe picked up their journals, and the word isolation stared up at her. Isolation, she said to herself. She looked at Auntie and smiled. That's not me anymore. I'm so glad I met Colleen. Auntie took Zoe's hand. I agree. Isolation is for plants, not people. I'm glad you met Colleen, too.